that unlike what a lot of people may think, Darwin's finches are not found one finch to every island, even though they evolved in different island environments. Can you tell them a little bit about the finches that are found here so we can talk about the work that we do?
Sure. Luis, you want to?
Well, it seems like you guys know about Galapagos already. Well, the Galapagos Islands, they came up from the ocean around 2 million years, 2.5 million years ago. And at that time, that was just a big piece of rock. And then it was colonized by animals and birds and plants coming from the mainland. And so at some point during those 5 million years ago, this group of birds arrived or managed to get from the mainland to Galapagos. And those are what we call now Darwin's finches. So that was a single species of bird, and nowadays we have 14 species of Darwin finches in different islands. So in those 2 million years, we have this what we call adaptive radiation of birds, where for a single species diversify into an array of different 14 new species. And so the cool thing is that they arrive to one of the islands and they start colonizing different islands. And just by geographical separation, they start to diversify and becoming new species. But then they start moving back again together. But now they are distinct species, so they cannot breed anymore. And so you now have in different islands several finch species coexisting in the same island, but they are still different species.
Alrighty. So we have not all 14 species here, as you mentioned, but we have quite a few. Let's see here. We have some of the important finches to know about. The main finch that we study here is called the medium ground finch, scientific name Geospiza fortis. But there are two others that are probably important to know about in order to understand the kind of main study that we're about to describe to you. One of them, and hopefully I'm going to pronounce this scientific name correctly, the small ground finch, Geospiza fuliginosa.
Yep.
I got it. Or we call them foolies for short, are small ground finches which look almost exactly like the medium ground finch, but smaller bodies and much smaller kind of cute little button beaks rather than the kind of somewhat larger ones in the medium ground finches. And then the mags, mag was short for, was it magnificent?
Magnorostris.
Magnorostris, darn. Geospiza magnorostris is our large ground finches, which we sadly don't see very many of, but they are around, and they have these massive honking beaks that take up like their entire heads. All of them look very much the same except for these size differences between them, especially in terms of the sizes of the beaks. And I want to see if there's someone who would be willing to come to the microphone because I have a question for you. So when we compare the huge honking beaks on the mags versus, say, the littler beaks on the foolies, what do you think might be a difference in terms of the kinds of foods that these two finches eat? Is there someone who would like to venture a guess about that? I can't see everybody in the room, so I'm going to rely on people in the room to call on a hand and bring someone up. Who do we have? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Colin's going to take it. All right. Excellent. Brave man. So what do you think? Big beaks versus little beaks. What kinds of things might they be eating?
The birds with the bigger beaks would eat larger foods versus the ones with the smaller beaks.
Excellent. On the islands, since not a lot of well, I wouldn't say not a lot of animal sources, but certainly compare plant versus animal sources. Not quite so many. These birds, they differ in the size of their beaks according to the sizes of seeds that they're eating. The mags, the bigger beaks, will tend to focus on, like you mentioned, Colin, bigger foods, in this case bigger seeds, and the little foolies with the cute little button beaks focus on much smaller seeds, little tinier ones that aren't quite so hard to break open. And then the fortis in the middle, why don't you tell us a little bit about the diversity that we see among the fortis that most people probably aren't aware of.
Sure. So one of the interesting things we've been finding here is that in the medium ground finch, so that's the fortis, there's actually a huge range of variation in beak sizes. So they span from very small birds, almost as small as the foolies, up to really, really large ones. But what's even more interesting is when we look at that range of sizes, we see very few intermediate ones. So there's a lot of really small fortises and a lot of really big ones. And what we call that, you may have learned this in your math classes, this is called a bimodal distribution. So it's a distribution that has two modes, or two peaks. And so one of the focuses of our work has been to try to figure out why. this is happening, and what are the factors that influence it?
Excellent. All right, so we have this medium ground finch, again to recap, Geospiza fortis, bimodal distribution, meaning a lot of fortis that have beaks that are nearly as big as the mags, a lot of fortises that have beaks nearly as small as the coolies, very few in the middle. But we see a difference in different areas here on this island, Santa Cruz, in terms of this bimodality. Before we get too far into that, though, I also want to pitch another one at you guys. So if we have a species which has a lot of individuals that are very large and a lot of individuals that are very small, is there anyone who'd like to volunteer an idea? How might that be related to a process called speciation, the process in which new species develop? Again, I'm going to rely on someone in the room to help us out because I can't see the entire room actually. You have one species with a lot who are very big, a lot who are very small. What might be the connection there to speciation, the development of new species? Any takers? I'm not sure because I can't see the entire room. Are we stuck on this one?
We have a taker.
Oh.
There you go.
Oh, we do. Excellent. I can't see your face. Come down a little bit. Who we have? All right, hands are taker. So, what do you think?
Maybe some species may die out because maybe the food source is gone, and then some may sprout up or something because a new food source or something has come up.
That's an excellent idea. Speaking of new food sources, can you guys comment on that one?
Yeah, that's actually that's very perceptive, and that's exactly one of the things that we've been finding in populations of the medium ground finch in the Fortis, in areas that are very isolated, where it's just the finches, and it's sort of like the way the islands were when Charles Darwin discovered them about 150 years ago. So one of the things that's changed since Charles Darwin has come is that there's actually now human populations on the islands. And can anyone, I'm going to be like Miss Rebecca and ask, do any of you guys have any ideas of what might the humans be doing in terms of food resources, what they might be doing to the finches? Any suggestions?
We have better technology.
So,
Hi.
Hi. So the humans have been they've introduced new animals and tree species that have been taking out the normal species, which are kind of like the food sources. So they're getting rid of the food sources and bringing in their own types of animals and plants.
Very good. Thank you, Margaret. Yep. Would you guys like to follow up on?
Sure. So there's a couple of really interesting points you mentioned there. So one is that humans are bringing in new animals, and that's something else that we're looking at in our project as well. Some of those animals are predators, right? Like cats, domestic house cats, kill a lot of birds. You also mentioned new plants and new trees, and that's true. There's a lot of introduced tree species, either flowers or fruits, that are changing the food that's available. But the third thing too that's really important is just the foods that humans themselves are eating. Potato chips, cookies, rice, all this food that we're eating and leaving in our garbage piles or on the street. So how might that impact finches? Having all this readily available food lying around that's soft and a high calorie and delicious, but doesn't require maybe as much energy to crack as a seed. How might that affect finch beak evolution, do you think?
Let's see if we can get on a taker here.
No, just hold it.
So we're wondering, we have delicious human foods laying around. We're wondering how that might affect finch beaks. Doubly brave. All right, what do you think?
it'll affect the evolution of the birds, so they'll kind of like de-evolve, so their beaks won't be as strong to crack like the harder seeds and stuff.
Yes, that's correct. This is very important because so if we go back to Darwin, Darwin was trying to teach us how species evolve, right? And he came up with the theory of evolution, right, and natural selection. And so that means that in normal random populations, the species, those individuals that have what we call a higher fitness, which are the ones that can reproduce the best, or can reproduce a lot of babies, and those babies keep reproducing, those are the ones that are going to survive. So that's the basic idea of natural selection. And so with finches, we have a large range of seed distribution, and you have two types of finches specialized in two different seed types. In that case, the small and the large, but the intermediate ones, they don't do very well, okay, because selection basically disfavor those. What happens is humans bring in new food resources, and let's say rice, which is a very soft and easy access food, they lay around, and so that means that those intermediate finches that in normal conditions don't do very well, they now have rice to eat. And so that will change the distribution of that bimodality that we were looking at. And so through time, that basically reduces the diversity of finches, or that divergence, or the process of speciation within these two morphology. And so that's very important because that allows us to learn how can we affect evolutionary process. And also we learn that as humans, when we interact with biodiversity and nature, we actually impact the process that leads to speciation itself. In this case, the process of evolution.
All right, cool. I think that one thing that would be helpful for us to do here before we move into taking some questions would be to talk a little bit about what some of the experiments are that we're doing and how they work. Starting, I guess, with...
I have a question for them.
Oh, please.
So I have a question for you guys. So based on what Luis had spoken about the availability of human foods, and it appears that these intermediate finches are able to survive now, if we wanted to design an experiment to see if it's the availability of all this easy food, or if it's just that the finches like those foods as opposed to maybe their native foods, those seeds that they've been doing, what kind of experiment do you think might we be able to design to try and test that, to see if it's about, oh, the food's just there and the finches can eat them, or the finches are like, oh, sort of what we were saying, that's super tasty food and that's what we want to eat, and our native foods, I don't know. What kind of experiments do you think we could do to explore that idea?
Yeah, so if you wanted to figure out, are finches eating human foods because they like them better, versus are they just eating them because they happen to be there? Does anybody have an idea about a kind of experiment? Don't mean like a special name, but just describe what would be an experiment that you might do to figure out if finches really like human foods. I know we're trying not to throw super easy questions at you. Excellent.
So you could do an experiment where both types of food are like equally available and like easy to get, and you could see which one they go to get first rather than the other one.
Excellent idea from Margaret. Yes, so tell them a bit about what we do.
Yeah, so you hit right on it. That's pretty much exactly what we're doing. So we go out into the wild and we collect seeds from 3 of the most common natural plants that we know that finches feed on. And then we've also prepared a selection of chips, cookies, and rice. And we arrange these randomly in a little tray, and we put it out there for about 10 minutes. And what we've done is we've weighed all these foods ahead of time. That's one of the things that your teacher is helping us with. So we weigh these 6 food types ahead of time, we put them out, we observe how many finches come and feed on them, and then we weigh them after, and we can see which ones were depleted and which ones weren't. And maybe your teacher can tell you what we've found so far.
Yeah, so far we have found that there are some differences, in fact, between finches that live in more human-occupied areas, like Puerto Ayora, where we are right now, the town, versus finches who live elsewhere, further out into more kind of untouched areas, finches who are out on the beaches. The finches who are here in town, pretty much every single test that I've seen the entire time that I've been here, when they've come to the plate, they've always gone to the chips first, and sometimes the cookies. And they pretty much leave the original foods, like their native foods, untouched. We test foods called Scutia, Turnifordia, and Cryptocarpus. And pretty much the only weight loss that we ever see from those is some seeds that happen to get knocked off the plate as they're madly dashing for delicious fatty foods and sugary foods that we bring along. Finches from other regions, I haven't seen a ton of the El Garapatero finches because I didn't happen to be on that team, but my understanding is that we don't see that strong of a trend among those birds. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the birds that live out in, it's called El Garapatero, it's an area that's further from town where people are not supposed to be. When we put that same plate out, they're not as keen on going for the chips and the cookies, is that we see a more even distribution among those foods, where they kind of will select evenly from our 6 choices, of which 3 are human foods and 3 are native foods. So birds that have not spent a lot of time around humans, you might infer, well, rather I'm going to ask you. So if we have birds that are far away from humans that don't seem to really have a preference, the birds in town really like to eat like the chips and the cookies. What would you infer from that data about the finches? Anybody have an idea? What do you think that might mean? If you had to draw a conclusion, quick conclusion, what would you think? Hi.
Hi. I would infer that the finches enjoy going for the human food more than the natural food.
And the finches in town seem like they've probably learned about this delicious human food, and so they go for that delicious, of course we all love chips and we all love cookies, and they go for them just like any of us would. The finches that live further away from humans, that haven't had that exposure to those foods, they basically haven't figured out how delicious and wonderful they are just because they haven't had a chance to eat them before. So when they come across the plate, they don't really care. It's all food to them, and they just kind of go for whatever. Let's see here. So that's the cafeteria experiment. And we were talking a little bit about cats. Can you summarize a little bit about, there's some new work that's just getting started.
All right, so I have a quick question for you guys. Do any of you guys have house cats? Can you guys raise your hands? Anyone have a cat at home? Nobody has cats?
I do some.
Some hands. Okay. So for those of you who have cats, if your cat's an outdoor cat, have they ever brought you a present? That's usually a formerly alive animal. Exactly. So can you imagine? You can imagine then what these kind of cats might be doing to island species of birds here on the Galapagos. So did you talk about the naivete of the island species?
No, I didn't.
All right. So on the mainland, so in North America, we have all sorts of predators, right? We've got big grizzly bears and big cats like pumas and bobcats and stuff like that, and they eat the prey items. But on an island like Galapagos, as Luis was saying, that sort of came up in the middle of the ocean and has been slowly colonized, there's no predators on these islands when the animals started to come here. So can someone come here and come up to the computer and tell me how might that affect the behavior of the animals that are here on an island with no predators? Does anyone have an idea? No?
Hard to tell, because again, we can only see part of the room.
We have someone.
I can see some.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. I think that they're probably like, since they're not used to predators, they're like kind of let their guard down. They're not like expecting to be like killed or eaten.
That's exactly right. The animals here in the Galapagos are famous for their naivete. They are famous for, we humans can get very, very close to the birds. In fact, they
hopped all over us.
Yeah, they come and they hop with us. So what's really interesting is on the islands with towns is we have these invasive house cats, but we also have islands that don't have any cats. So one of the new projects that we're starting to develop is we want to know if the finches have been able to adapt to this new introduced predator. So we're going to see how the birds behave on islands with cats and islands without cats, and that's still in the very, very beginning stages. So we're still just learning how to figure out how to quantify that, because behavior is very, very
I knew this was gonna happen.
here on islands with cats and islands without cats. So we're still in the process of brainstorming, but it's really exciting because we're hoping this might have some big conservation aspects to it, because humans are bringing all sorts of invasive new predators and new plants and all those sort of things, and we want to know how that's going to affect the native fauna. So that's one of our new projects that we're working on right now.
Yeah, just remember. So something else that we will have to mention that we're doing is that we're also trapping the birds on the different sites. And so we do that by setting up nets, and these are some special nets that we call mist nets. They are very soft and fine, and so we set it up. It's like a badminton net, yeah, exactly. And so we set up in the field in different places, and very basically birds can't see them. They cannot see them, and so they just basically fly into the nets. So we take them out, and we do all sorts of measurements. We measure the beaks, the weight, the size, everything. And we take blood samples to do DNA analysis. And so your professor here is actually helping us in the field with that. And so what we do after that is we can compare the site where there is humans and the site without humans, and see what the differences are, and how, or see what can we conclude in terms of how humans' food can impact the divergence or the speciation advantages.
Right. Thank you. So those are some, but not even all of the studies that we're doing here. I was kind of bad again with time, but I do want to allow time for questions, because I know that everybody here has a question that they would like to ask myself, ask one of the scientists about experiments, about the Galapagos, about being a scientist, becoming a scientist. It can be whatever. We have time enough for a few. We would like to get started with some. So does anybody have a question they would like to come up to the microphone and ask? Everybody's going to be leaving some of right now, but... All right, I think I see some hands. Let's get somebody up here. We have... All right.
As the island sink, will the animals...
Oh, right. Yeah.
As the island...
Sorry, can you repeat that, Helen?
As the islands sink, will the birds migrate to the new islands forming, or will they die with the islands?
Oh, interesting question. So,
Yeah, so the Galapagos are, the oldest islands are sinking and newer ones are being formed. So yes, when an island sinks, will the birds all die or will they migrate to another island?
Yeah, that's a very important, interesting question. So the Galapagos, basically, they emerged from the ocean around, well, the last ones, they're still emerging from the bottom of the ocean, okay? And so the places are moving, they're actually sinking also, the old ones. And there's some estimate that says that in 15 million years, all the Galapagos Islands will be under the ocean again, so we'll be gone. So yeah, presumably all the species that they are here now will basically die off, will get extinct. Of course, some of the birds might be able to...
yeah.
We're happy to answer any if they invite you.
Yeah, definitely. Hi, were you able to hear Dr. De Leon's answer to the question?
No,
How about, yeah, I noticed, unfortunately. So what I think we're going to do is we'll keep going as we can. If it drops out again, then we'll have to kind of call it a day. But just so you know, in case it drops out again, anything for questions, I'll be able to get them to the scientists and get answers back to you guys. But we'll ask questions for as long as the signal lasts here. Can you wave your hands if you were able to hear Dr. De Leon's answer before it cut out? Oh yeah, okay, they did. All right. I saw a couple of other hands went up with questions. We have time, I think, for one or two more before we need to go today. So can we get one or two more questions before we're done?
So much for my question.
Hi.
Awesome. Hi, Kim.
So like Darwin wasn't able to record which finch was from each island. So were you guys able to figure that out?
Good question.
Yeah, that's actually a really good observation. So Darwin's finches are named after Charles Darwin for developing the theory of evolution. But when he came here, as you guys might have heard, and as Kim mentioned, he collected finches from different islands, but he put them all in the same bag, and he didn't label which finches came from which island. So when he was realizing that there was all these different beak shapes, these different species of finches, he actually had to go to the museum collections and find out what was going on with the finches, and was luckily able to get finches that had been properly labeled from which island they were. So what's really cool is that now that a lot of research has been going on the islands, we know which species occur on which islands. And what's also really cool, as you guys know with all the beaks, is that because they eat different foods and because we have different, what we call ecozones on the island, they will all exist on the same island, but they won't necessarily all exist in the same place. So down by the beach where our field site is, where your teacher's been helping us, it's very dry and very brown right now because it's a dry season. So it's mostly just seeds there. But up in the mountains where there's a lot more moisture and it's much more green, we find actually different kinds of finches that are more reliant on things like insects and those sort of things that are found in sort of the more cooler, moister areas. But we haven't found any finches that aren't supposed to be on this island, because as far as we know with genetics that have been done, there's very little migration from island to, among islands. So the finches on Santa Cruz here on this island tend to stay here. And the finches on Floriana tend to stay on Floriana, and the finches on Daphne Minor stay on Daphne Minor. So there's very little movement among the islands with these finches.
Cool. Good question, Kim. Thank you. We have time for one more before we have to go today.
One more question.
Final question. Don't worry, I'm sure that no matter who it is, it'll be a good one. Movement, but not totally clear.
Which island has the most distinct features?
Oh. Which island has the most distinctive features?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like geographical features or bird features?
Can you clarify, Pat? Do you mean like geographical features or the most like distinctive, like life forms, biotic features?
I don't know, just like features in general. Geographic.
So which island is most distinctive and like unique and unusual, maybe? Is what he's asking?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. There's quite a bit of variation in, for example, in geography and the plant species we find in different islands, and also in the size of the islands. And so we have 4 major islands that are the biggest one of the island. And those islands are the ecological, more heterogeneous islands. So they have a lot of plant species that are very high. They're around 900 meters of the sea level. And so that means that it creates this sonification in plant and vegetation as you go up in the highlands. And so that's really interesting because that creates a lot of heterogeneity in the environment. And that means that for finches and other animals, they can partition their niche or partition their habitat. And so they specialize in different places, or they prefer some places, either the highlands or the lowlands. So that's very important. And so the major island, the biggest one is Isabela, which is the biggest island in the archipelago. Then Santa Cruz, which is the island where we work. And then we have Floriana, and we have San Cristobal, which are different islands. It's a little smaller than this, but these are kind of the biggest ones. And then we have a bunch of little kind of very tiny islands, which are like probably a mile across. And so those are very small. They have less vegetation and usually fewer finch species.
And then just to wrap it up, I guess, is what I'm going to ask each of the 3 of you to tell us one thing before we go. What's your favorite thing about being in the Galapagos and working in the Galapagos? And then we're going to call it a day.
Oh my gosh, that's so hard.
I know, it's hard.
For me, I guess, and I'm sure, I hope I don't steal their answers. For me, what's really cool with the research we do and with being here on the Galapagos is we get to see evolution in action. It's just really cool working with these finches and being able to see up close all the diversification of the beaks, and then to see them feeding on all the different types of food types that their beaks are specialized in. And I'm from Montreal, up in Canada, and the other reason I love working here in the Galapagos is because I don't have to deal with snow right now.
Maybe you can tell us the second when we get to you. So we're gonna go.
So my answer is somewhat similar to Kyoko's. I think that for anyone who's studied biology, and especially evolutionary biology, coming here is such a special experience. And when you learn about evolutionary biology in high school and later on in university, one of the classic examples you're going to hear about is Darwin's finches and all the work that's been done here. So to read those studies for years and then be able to come here and hold the birds yourselves and see these processes in action is very, very special.
Yeah, and also along the same lines. So Darwin said that evolution will take too much time to be able for us to be able to see it. But basically in the Galapagos and in many other places around the world, we can see evolution happening before our eyes. And so that's one of the most fascinating things here at Galapagos. On the other hand, one thing that's very interesting from our work is that we are able to understand and see how we as humans, as a Homo sapiens, as a species, can interact with nature and alters the process of speciation and evolution per se. So that's very, very important too, because this allows us to understand that when we do things to nature, we actually get a response from nature. And that will alter the process that Darwin studied 150 years ago. So that's very important too.
All right, I want to thank all three of you very much for being able to be here and do this today, and I'm sure that everybody there thanks them as well for giving their time today.
Thank you guys. You guys asked great questions, and we hope that you guys are all going to become biologists and come and visit the Galapagos Islands.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Thanks. Bye. So I'm looking forward to being back there with you on Monday. I'll be able to talk with you in more depth then about some things. I'm as sad as I am, but I'm not going to be here anymore. But don't forget to hand in your questions into the inbox. So know where it is before you go. Some of you, I think, are going to stay there. But I hope that you enjoyed this today. And again, I look forward to seeing you all soon. Bye.
1367.
Exactly what you said by you, Tom. Amazing.
877.
So trusting.
818. And I'll do the big head length now. She was 3544.
She started just getting her feathers and getting her
Head
the others were sort of
1491.
like that. But she actually bounced up and down on her feet like that. Maybe she was stretching her legs, kind of like we do.
1439. Can we do the tarsus? 2228.
I just think it's so amazing.
And
So
the wing length.
it's such a story of development, isn't it? It's so clever. And the fact that it's all hollow. Yeah, so optimized.
64. 64, correct.
Yeah. So resilient. Absolutely.
So we're going to do a blood sample now.
So keep it going. Amazing. It's also extraordinary how you imagine a bird that has feathers all around, but they're not actually there in the middle. Yeah. There's gaps between. Yeah, and they have a perfect pattern, like overlaying. So and it really surprised me when I found that out, because you sort of imagine that
You can get this on
that was just
top.
absolutely haphazard.
So with breath, we'll keep the bottom part for disposal of the needle.
Really?
So it's in the container.
So it goes in with the needle?
Yeah, because
the needle sticks in.
Yeah, so you can just take this whole part out, and the needle goes in here. Okay. So when he's done with the needle, you can just click it back in, and then it goes into the shark.
Gotcha. Perfect. So you can pass me that vial.
That one right.
Tomorrow we'll leave this one.
I think we've done well. Oh, yeah. There you are, Nicky. I told you you'd do all right. You have little faith.
So we're doing this.
Right, that's that one.
I didn't shake that up.
No, give it a shake.
And now we can take a picture and wave it.
Those are good.